Hello out there in podcast land. This is your host, Dacia Clay. I have a favor to ask of you. If you're a fan of the show, and I am going to guess that you are because you're listening to us right now, go to your iTunes, subscribe to the show, give us a little rating and a review. Okay, great, thanks. So, here we are again, yet another in our Bachtoberfest series. The bad news is that I once again have to say the words Bachtoberfest.
Bachtoberfest.
And him too. The good news is that you get to hear cellist Matt Haimovitz talking about Bach, which is pretty freaking cool. Matt's actually been on the show before. He was on with Christopher O'Reilly then. If you like this episode, go and check that one out for sure. By the way, we did a Google Hangout that goes with this show, so look for that on the internet. Matt and I recording this episode on video. It's pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to shut up, listen to the episode. Enjoy it. Bye. My name is Dacia Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock, and I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical, I really want to learn. So, every week on this show, a classical music expert will give me a piece of classical music they think I should know, and then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the classical classroom. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Dacia Clay, and here with me today is cellist Matt Haimovitz. He attended Juilliard and Harvard, which you may have heard of. He was the youngest person to receive the Avery Fisher Career Grant for Exceptional Musical Achievement. He likes to bring classical music to non-traditional venues like nightclubs. He was the first classical artist to record at CBGB's. I think he opened for the Ramones. He started the Oxingale record label on which you can hear his new CD, the Cello Suites, according to Anna Magdalena. Matt Haimovitz, welcome back to the Classical Classroom.
Great to be back with you.
And I can actually see you because we are having a Google Hangout, which is really cool.
You can sort of see me, although I'm behind a mic. That's all right.
I think I'm obscured too.
It is good to see you.
So my first question to you is, why are you dressed like a lumberjack on the cover of your CD?
Because, winter's coming and I have to get the firewood ready. Right.
That is important. And, you got to bring your cello out into the woods.
You don't deal with that in Houston, right? You don't have to worry about that. But up here on the, on the East Coast, it gets cold.
We don't have this winter that you speak of. So actually, I want to know about Bach's Cello Suites because I think you have now recorded these twice. So first,
right.
What's a suite? And then what are Bach's Cello Suites?
Well, a suite is something that you have for dessert. No, actually, it's a collection of dance movements. Interestingly, Bach wrote 6 cello suites, and Bach liked the number 6. He wrote 6 of a series of violin partitas and sonatas and Brandenburg Concerti, and 6 was an important number, and it's also important biblically, in the story of Genesis, 6 days and 1 day of rest. So there's something about this kind of cyclic number for Bach that is very important. So there are 6 suites, and each suite has 6 movements, beginning with a prelude, which is kind of generally more improvisatory in feeling. You can almost imagine that Bach improvised it and then wrote it down to some degree, and then it's followed by 5 dance movements. And in the cello suites, interestingly, the architecture of each suite follows the same form. So we have an allemande, kind of an older Baroque German dance, courant, which can come from Italy or France, a very lively dance, very fast, And the Saraband from Spain, which is more, it's the slower dance. It was actually thought in that period, in Bach's time, to be the lascivious dance. It was the sensual, sexy dance. Mm-hmm. But it's really the heart of the suite. And then that's followed by, here it varies a little bit in the different suites. You've got minuets in the first two, bourrées in suites 3 and 4, and then you have gavottes in suites 5 and 6. Mm-hmm. And then finally, you have the closing movement, the jig, which for the most part is kind of a virtuosic, closure to the piece, except in certain cases, like in the 5th suite, very dark C minor suite, the jig is kind of almost just a skeleton of a jig. It sort of fades out and just comes back to earth.
Back to earth.
Or back to the earth, I should say, like dust in a way. Like all of us.
On Classical Classroom, we're actually in the midst of Bachtober. All of our shows this month are about Bach. And so what I've learned is that Bach was really kind of all about form and sort of measuring things. And like you mentioned, the numbers. Why did that appeal to him so much? And is that part of what makes him so kind of unusual?
Well, I think it's the balance of that kind of intellectual instinct, and I mean, he's a true composer's composer, I mean, he's really, as you said, with numbers, I mean, he's putting these things together in ways that are so intellectually stimulating. You can sit there and analyze them and just, it's breathtaking in how he put it together, and how he keeps track of, I mean, you listen to a Bach fugue, so complex. He's keeping track of 4 or 5 voices happening at once and creating this large coherent form out of that. It's really pretty amazing. But at the same time, his music on a gut level is just so moving. It can bring us to tears, in how beautiful and how moving it is. And I think that's what is so spectacular. You take a dance movement, let's say, well, let's go with the 5th suite again. The courant of the 5th suite is kind of this French style courant. It's not quite as rambunctious and jumpy as the Italian style courants. And you could look at that, it's in 3, and you could look at it as in 3, but you could also simultaneously look at it like it's in 2. And that kind of rhythmic complexity, not only is there polyphony in the melodic lines, not only are we keeping track of several voices happening at once simultaneously, we're also keeping track of different grooves, different sense of pulse in the music. And all that is happening at the same time. And so the levels of that, it's really it's like, a Shakespeare play that you can kind of endlessly look at and sort of see in all these different perspectives and as metaphors for so many different things. And, you think that you understand the words, but under the surface, those words might mean something completely different. And with Bach, it's like that at every second.
That's really interesting. It's because you don't really think of math as being something that produces something beautiful, except for, I can think of all kinds of examples in nature where that's where the symmetry of a thing produces this beauty. And I don't know, that makes me think of exactly. I mean, and it's nature, it just happens, but there is, one of the beauties of being a human being is that we get to ask these questions and sort of try to understand, like, how does this happen, and how for things to survive there often is symmetry or asymmetry. I think with Bach, on a certain level, it's instinctive. I don't think he's thinking mathematically, in equations and so on when he's writing. It's the same thing, with a modern day composer like Philip Glass. For Philip, he just as much said, writing Orbit, this solo cello piece, was like writing a letter.
You know, it just came out of him. But if you actually analyze it, there's all kinds of fun things and symmetries to look at, and it's very, very thoughtful, clever, and probably incorporates the golden mean in some way, and all kinds of stuff that composers over time think about and use. But I think for some of these composers, it's just the way their brain is wired.
Yeah, just to use those forms and the math to create something that's lovely to listen to. I could talk about this all day, but I really want to talk about Anna Magdalena, because as I was reading, so you recorded the Bach Cello Suites before, like a while back,
right? And
then you decided to re-record them on the CD that you just put out, and it all has something to do with this woman, Anna Magdalena. So tell us who she was and how she inspired this new recording.
Sure. Well, I mean, it started with, quite honestly, from within. Like I didn't recognize what I did back in 2000, and so I thought I've got to go back and re-record this music. But as I was working on that project of re-recording this music, the manuscript of Anna Magdalena became very important to me, partly because the one in J.S. Bach's own hand has not survived to history. So that one's lost. I don't know, the kids made origami eggs out of it or something, or I don't know.
All 21 of his kids.
Probably drew on the manuscript pages or whatever. So fortunately, his second wife, Anna Magdalena, made a very faithful copy, and it's kind of uncanny. Her handwriting is very close to J.S. Bach. I think unless you're a real expert, you couldn't tell the difference between the two. It's a bit of a controversial manuscript in that some people think, oh, she had so many kids to take care of and she was in a hurry, and did she make mistakes, and does she really mean those splotches, and or is that just like squid ink being spilled on the manuscript, and those aren't really articulations, so people, there's all kinds of thought about this. But I started to look very closely at it, and I've started to feel that there's a lot of valuable information, and so I became a detective, trying to figure out what does she mean by this. And, whether it's in Bach's own hand or Anna Magdalena, in that time period, there's very little indication in certain ways. There are 4 dynamic markings in all 6 Bach Cello Suites in the Anna Magdalena version. All 4 of them happen in the prelude of the 6th suite of Bach. Piano, forte, piano, forte. That's it. So loud, soft, and nowhere else in all 6 suites. So you have 3 hours of music, and he doesn't tell you whether to be loud or soft or anything in between. So with Anna Magdalena, there were many, many important sort of aspects that jumped out at me, and I sort of gradually unearthed and investigated further. And a big part of it is articulation. How many notes do you put on one bow? I know it sounds very esoteric and like very cello nerdy, but it has to do with the way we speak and the way language works, and whether you sing or you speak.
When you say how many notes on one bow, you mean like when you move the bow across the strings, like how many notes are you getting out of that one, like sort of push or pull?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Cool. So with Anna Magdalena manuscript, there are a lot more separate notes than in many of the editions. So you go back and forth on individual notes. You have to figure out, when she writes a line over 2 notes, is that 2 slurred or is it 3 slurred? Are there 3 notes to a bow or 2? And then sometimes, very rarely, she'll put like 32 notes on one bow, and the effect will be stunning. It'll be very different than the back and forth that you are used to.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So things like that start to inform, and it starts to sort of create a sense of rhetoric, the way the line is shaped, and it starts to, since you're providing your own bass line as a cellist, you can put one bass note on one bow, and so that note rings through the rest of the bar, and because you've given it its due on the one bow, and all of a sudden you have a sense of real polyphony. of several voices happening at once.
Was it unusual that a woman would participate in transcribing Bach's music like this in the day? What was their role then?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And, there's some controversial musicologists, I think, in Australia who decided that Anna Magdalena may have, in fact, composed the Bach Cello Suites.
Wow.
So I play with that a little bit in my title of the album. But she was, I believe she was a composer and also a singer in her own right. So obviously she was also very supportive of her husband and was his copyist and was a very good one. And it takes great skill to do what she did for him with the copying. But yeah, it's true that there are not a whole lot of women composers that we know of from that period and or who have made it into mainstream, let's say.
I'm sure that that's always been the case. It's just that they're lesser known, or maybe not known at all.
Yeah, and I think it was a little more clandestine somehow. Yeah. Bach, most of his life he was working for the church, and in this period where he wrote the Bach Cello Suites, he was working for the court. So, yeah, it was kind of an all-men's club at that point.
Well, so your sense then was that, like, not only was she just copying down what Bach had done, she was kind of adding her own. She was infusing the manuscripts with her own ideas. I
don't think so. I think she was very faithful to Bach. I have a feeling. Okay. I have a feeling that if it comes up, if somebody discovers the original manuscript, that we'll find that she was very, very close to the original. I don't think she comes up with her own articulations. I'm quite sure that she's trying to copy what Bach did.
So how was this manuscript that you recorded from different from the one on the recording that you did before?
In some subtle ways and in a few major drastic ways. Believe it or not, there are some actual time signatures that are different on the Bärenreiter edition that I used to record the first set. For example, the preludes of the fourth suite and the prelude of the fifth suite are very clearly in cut time in 2 in the Anna Magdalena version. And in the Bärenreiter, it's written as 4/4. So, feeling a piece of music in 4 or feeling it in 2 gives it a very different sense of impulse and very different sense of tempo. And so that has actually some pretty profound implications. But there are many, many, many small decisions that are very different, in terms of, like, I don't know if you've ever heard the opening prelude of the first suite played by Pablo Casals.
Mm-mm.
He's the first one to record these pieces, and he played those pieces with 8 notes on one bow at the opening of the prelude. And very clearly in the Anna Magdalena, she puts 3 notes to a bow with some separates. We argue about where the three note slur occurs, but the way I've done it is quite different from the way most people articulate it. And to me, it just makes, more sense because the three voices are very clearly delineated the way I've done it. So I use very much the Anna Magdalena articulation there and throughout, actually. I mean, it just starts to inform a lot of, the idea that when there are sequences, when material repeats, she rarely has it consistent. She'll change it. And initially I thought, well, maybe I have to make it consistent. But then I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, and I realized that inconsistency or variety is part of what the language is all about, and that you might hear the same thing, but you take it a step down and it's not quite the same thing. It as things intensify or develop, it takes on a different tone, different meaning, and so it gives a whole new shape to the music.
Well, Matt, I have so many things that I want to ask you about this, but it looks like we've actually run out of time, so this means you have to come back and talk about this again.
Sounds great. Would love to.
All right, everybody, that does it for this episode of Classical Classroom. For more Classroom, go to houstonpublicmedia.org/classroom. Find us on iTunes, where you can and should rate and review us. You can also follow us on Twitter and Tumblr and YouTube. Email me at dclay@houstonpublicmedia.org. Thanks today to audio producer Toddtober Hulslander for twiddling knobs. Thanks to program director St. Flynn for discovering new selfie apps this week. Thanks to editor Mark DiClaudio for his piercing Pookie Bear eyes. Thanks to Matt Haimovitz for being here today, and to the good folks at Crossover Media for setting up our Google Hangout. Thanks to me for saying words, but most of all, thanks to you for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Bye. All right, sushi.